Hey guys, just a quick disclaimer before this video starts. It's already a long video and I want to try and keep this short. I'm splitting this one down into two parts because me and Shirk spent over an hour talking together for this interview. So keep an eye out on the channel for the next part of this one that's coming maybe a couple of days after this one, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, Shirk, can you tell me a little bit more about you and your role within the team? What is it that you do for Dead Matter?
So I'm the lead artist, I guess, on the team, but my actual role is environmental art. Okay. So I essentially, like, everything you see in Dead Matter regards with like the world and whatnot, that's kind of been my doing. And everything else, like animation and stuff, I don't really deal with any of that, but it's mainly just, I guess, like modeling and texture and lighting and the atmosphere of the game is kind of what I have my hand in.
Yeah, because I mean that's a really important point in every game, especially when it's a survival game, right? If you're spending hours and hours trekking through this world, potentially not seeing players every so often, just, you know, doing the PvE content, you need that ambience, right? You need that immersion is something that we all look for in games. So that's a big part of that.
Yeah, it's a huge part, especially if it's like a survival game where it's just a huge open world where you don't really have the opportunity to have like a linear level where you can script stuff, right? A lot of single player games, you have like a hallway, and maybe in the hallway you have a trigger and it plays a sound. Absolutely. Or a light turns on.
So basically what you're saying is we're not like on an on track, like on rails game, right? Like we're not on this system. Exactly. We don't have these trigger mechanisms. You have a completely open world that you need to find alternatives to do something with to get that immersion factor.
Yeah, so when it comes to the atmospherics of the game, they're that much more important because you can't like lure a player into a specific room or something like that to have something happen. Everything kind of has to be dynamic. So you have to have a much stronger and more prominent atmosphere in order to kind of get that same feeling, because you have a lot less control. So if you can just make it more immersive in general, right, you just have a lot more leniency with
absolutely. Yeah,
just
fully agree.
Game.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of going back to kind of your role on the team, how was it that you joined the project, and how long have you been working with the team now?
So I joined, I don't know when it was, but I joined in the Kickstarter phase. So it was within that like 30-day window. Right. I was on Facepunch, which is was a forum for Gary's Mod and source modding. And somebody had posted a like a thread about a game called Dead Matter, and it kind of rung a bell, but I didn't really think anything of it. And I checked it out, and it turned out it was being made by somebody else from Facepunch. And that turned out to be Johnny, right? And I knew Johnny from Facepunch like years and years ago. We used to play like the War Z together and stuff. And anyways, I just sent him a message because at this point I kind of wanted to get more into game development, right? Because I was doing stuff with the Unreal Marketplace, and I just wanted to kind of go full in on game development. So I just sent him a message on Facepunch, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey man, you need any help with the game? It's looking pretty cool." And like immediately he was like, "Yeah man, like I'd love to have you on the team." And that's kind of how I got onto the team. And then I at that time I think I completely forgot who Johnny was, and I forgot that I was friends with him years before. And then I kind of fell out of contact with him because of something he did to me on Steam with he like changed my profile picture to a penguin or something like that. And he just pissed me off at that point. I tried reporting him to Valve, to like Steam, because I didn't know what was going on, right? I'm like, I didn't like that he somehow sent me like a link or something that was able to change my profile picture, and he's just messing with me, right? But I didn't know that at the time, so I kind of like cut communication with him. and kind of forgot about them.
I'll keep that in mind for if like we get down the line to when Dead Matter comes out, you know, and if I have to speak to Johnny or do an interview with Johnny, I'll keep it in mind just not to click on any of the links that Johnny sends me. I'll keep that in mind.
It's funny because I don't remember how me and Johnny actually met at first, right? It was on Facepunch, and I think he was doing like level design back then or something for one of his Gary's Mod servers. Something like that, but we played some games together, like the War Z. And it's funny because the War Z, when him and I were playing it, I don't remember if this was before Dead Matter mod on Crisis or not, but I remember very vividly we were like in a city somewhere in that game, and we were being pinned down by a bunch of other players, and they were up on like an overpass, and we were just talking about how awesome this feeling is and like how sweet it would be for us to make our own game, right? Like our own zombie survival game. And like I'm saying, I don't know if that was before the Dead Matter mod or after, but I feel like that was one of the initial inception points for Dead Matter without us even really realizing it.
And that kind of drove your passion from there, and like maybe influenced some of the choices you made a little bit later down the line, especially when you reference map design, right? And how the map is made, like those instances you have in other games like War Z and the Dead Matter mod, like you're talking about, those can shape your influences further down the line, right?
Exactly. Like that whole scenario that we had in the War Z with players pinning us down, it was PvP, and a lot of people don't like PvP, and like I'm terrible at PvP. Like I'm pretty bad at games, right? But I had so much fun with it, right? Like it was adrenaline pumping, and it was such an exciting, time in that game. In an otherwise pretty stale, boring game, that was a really fun moment playing with your friends in like a PvP scenario. And it definitely did go on to kind of influence, I guess, my perception of PvP in some games, right? Because games like DayZ, right? Like I hate PvP in DayZ because I'm terrible at it, right? But it can be a very fun element to a game, right? If it's done well, or if you can pull something that you enjoy from it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I would say that for me, I mean, I played War Z quite a bit back in the day, and yes, it had its problems. It's fair to say, but I think as far as the PvP goes, it was pretty smooth. The PvP in itself was pretty smooth for me, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think that adrenaline rush comes from what's at stake, right? Like everything you'd gained so far is at stake in that scenario.
And you don't really get that from straight PvE so much, right? Because with PvE, it's like what the limitations generally are of whatever enemy you're going against. They're not gonna flank you from the top of a building or something like that, or attack you from a super far distance. But with a player, it just adds like a huge level of uncertainty. Yeah. And as long as that player is not like cheating or incredibly good where they can just headshot you from like a kilometer away, it's pretty fun, right? If you can stand a chance against them, like we did when me and Johnny were playing the War Z, it was pretty fun. Like it just, I don't know how else to explain it besides it just having a depth that was enjoyable.
It felt right. That's we all look for those games, right, where we can just sink hours and hours into it and still enjoy it after considerable playtime. And I think the world around you is a big part of that. So obviously, with you taking so many draws from other games, and for the rest of the team, for that matter, it's we've talked to Gunslinger previously, and we've talked about Project Zomboid. We've talked about DayZ, Scum. We're now talking about War Z. There's all these games that you can pull inspiration from out there, and whilst they might not be some of the best games, there's always something that you seem to be able to take away from it.
Yeah, definitely. There's always some element of any game that it does good, or it has good contrast to something else in the game, and it's a good element that you can look at and compare it to how other games, right? Like games like Miscreated, right? We're not the biggest fans of Miscreated, but there's definitely elements in that game that are done well, right? And you can look at those elements and be like, okay, these are done pretty well. This is a good design decision, right? And then there's other things that aren't done so well, and you can kind of compare with a difference between those two things.
Absolutely. It's something that me and Gunn discussed quite in detail, and something that I talk about a lot when I talk to my chat on stream is like how you guys seem to be picking like the best aspects from several other games, like, you know, the Project Zomboid, the way that the world changes, Scum, how it has its food system, but not going too in depth with it. All sorts of interesting things. And I think that's a big aspect of that.
We don't want to we don't want to remake the same game that somebody else has made with something slightly better. If you take all the good elements of every other game and you kind of put them together, hopefully you get something that's just overall good, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the theory.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were aiming for, right? You take all the elements of things that are fun in games and you combine them, and something that's not so fun, you know, even if it's realistic, it's like, just ditch it. You know, if players don't really enjoy it, kind of get rid of it, right? If it doesn't add to the game, then what's the point of it being in the game?
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that. So you said when you joined the team, you kind of wanted to jump kind of like wholeheartedly into development. Can I ask what sort of experience you had before joining the team? Like, had you done anything like this in the past? You mentioned being on Facepunch, so I assume you have an understanding of it, but was this something new for you, or?
It was definitely new in the aspect of working on an official game. Like, I've worked on mods in the past. I worked on a mod called Ivan's Secrets for Half-Life 2, and that was a pretty ambitious mod back in the day, and like it actually got pretty popular. It never got released because we had some hard drive failures and whatnot. But a lot of my prior experience was with mods. Like, I worked on No More Room in Hell, and I was a level designer for that as well.
That was fantastic. I enjoyed that game. I remember that. I remember that being some of the most interesting like co-op survival in an arena kind of setting.
It was definitely a fantastic co-op mod, and for a mod, it was really well done, right? Like, total conversion mod, and everybody was just kind of doing it on their free time. Like, it was really completely a mod in and out.
See, 13-year-old me didn't know that, and 13-year-old me probably didn't care much about that. But it's interesting to hear that you guys did that out of your spare time, rather than, you know, obviously just getting paid.
Yeah, well,
I guess.
I think when I started on No More Room in Hell, I think I was probably like 15 or something like that. So I was still pretty young as well when I was working on that. But when I worked on Source Engine mods, and like when I was a level designer, I would say I was pretty good at what I did, and I was definitely able to make things look good. So that always helped if I wanted to like work on a mod or something like that.
It's interesting as well that you mentioned like Gary's mod and stuff earlier. Really interesting, because I put a hell of a lot of playtime into Gary's mod, and I was oh man, I was a bit of a loser. I played a lot of Half-Life 2 RP. Like, you know, the serious stuff that was on Clockwork. I don't know if you're familiar with any of that, but it was like,
I've played some RP in my day. Like, I played well, I don't really remember much of it because I was literally like 10 or 11 when I started. But was like RP Downtown or whatever it was.
Oh, it's the dark RP servers.
Probably. I never knew what I was doing in those games. I just kind of ran around and just tried messing with people.
Yeah.
So. I could never get into it because I was never that into it. Like, I never knew what I was doing, so I could never actually RP. I just kind of, it's like, oh, you can choose to be a police officer. Oh, you can get a gun. Oh, you can shoot people. Okay, I'll do that.
I mean, Dark RP was kind of like the semi-serious, and then they had like some not so serious ones. And the ones that I used to play on were like kind of, you know, your movement speed was capped to walking, and then like sprinting would use your stamina, and it was all very in depth, and you use like emotes and stuff, and typed out what you were doing, your actions. You had to like roll for success rates with different things.
Yeah.
You know, it was very like serious, and we actually set up our own server at one point, and it did quite well. We enjoyed it. It was an enjoyable experience. But it's funny we're talking about this because my whole kind of like my primary thing that I did on that server whilst we were running it was decoration. I spent my whole time like setting up these scenarios in the map and like laying out like all of these different things and like filling these little rooms that like on the map were just empty. But because we had such control over, so it was because we had so much control over the props. I just spent ages and ages like laying out these rooms.
Yeah,
and,
I did that in Gary's mod as well. Like just not for RP, but just filling up worlds with stuff, and it was such a fun aspect of it.
Again, it's just that immersive experience, right? Like if people feel like the world is a living, breathing world going on behind them, then people are going to enjoy it more, and little things like that play into that. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I have a question to ask you, and this one may require a little bit of thought, may not. Depends, how long you've had to deal with this one. But if you had to sell Dead Matters to someone in one sentence, what would you say to them?
Oh, okay. I don't want to compare it to any other game, so that it's hard because it's kind of its own game, right? Like it's a survival game, but it's not a survival game, or zombie survival, I should say, but it's not in the same like realm as something like DayZ, Survive the Nights, Miscreated, or Scum, or 7 Days to Die. Like it's just its own game, but it's like a hybrid of a bunch of different games, right? Like we were saying earlier, it has the elements of all the good elements of a bunch of different games, right? Like we have RP elements, we have realistic survival elements, that games like Scum have or DayZ have, but they're not so in depth. We have the zombies that, funny enough, a lot of other zombie survival games don't have. But
yes,
there's just a lot of elements, and I don't know how to describe what Dead Matter would be in one sentence without comparing it to something else.
Well,
it's kind of its own thing.
You could say something along the lines of, you are taking some of the greatest aspects from varying other survival games and then putting them into their own world with their own...
but then that plays off of like you have to know what the other games are, and you have to compare it to that. Right?
I understand that. I'm sure you get a lot of people. For example, I've seen the Discord server.
Yeah.
Is this going to be better than DayZ? Is one of the top questions you guys get asked, and I've had.
Well, it's not like we're trying to make it worse than DayZ, right? Be on par with it, but we much prefer to be much better than it.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally understand. I definitely think it's a difficult question. I think
once the game develops more and it kind of grows more of an identity of itself, it would be an easier thing to kind of sum up in one sentence.
Absolutely.
But it's almost it's more than, I guess, what words can describe right now for a game, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand. So I did a, I wouldn't say an interview, but I did kind of like an informal chat with Reggie and Hank. If you guys don't know who Reggie and Hank are, Reggie Bless, Regicidal Nut. He is the writer and also part of the community management team for Dead Matter, and Havoc Hank is the senior moderator or part of the moderation team. I always get that mixed up. But Hank's response to that, which you might find interesting, I asked them both this question. Hank's response was basically, go and look at the stuff out there. Just go and look at the videos. Go and look at the website. Go and look at the pictures. And that was all he said.
Yeah. It's kind of transcends a description that you can just write in words, right? Like you kind of have to look at the videos. You kind of have to see, what our, I guess, ambitions are, or our plan for the game is. Because it's just so hard to sum it up in one sentence. Like we could say it's a roguelike zombie survival game where you choose your own, path, but that doesn't really capture the whole essence of the game, right? There's a lot more to it than what that sentence kind of leads on to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more so with some people, you might even catch some negative vibes from that because, the zombie survival genre in itself, I think it's fair to say we've had a couple of disappointments in that field in the past.
Yeah, it's definitely like, well, what does Dead Matter differ from the rest of the zombie survival?
Absolutely.
And it's like, well, we could give you a list and whatnot, but that, that's just a list, right? We'd prefer to show you what actually differs, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where it kind of transcends just like a description.
And if I could
Kind of have to do it
interrupt,
yourself.
yeah, if I could interrupt for a minute as well, I hear that from my chat with Hank and Reggie that you guys might be able to sum that up a little bit better in the future, because I hear that you guys are working on another trailer currently as well.
We're not working on it currently. We do have the plan. We want to get a trailer out before we go into closed alpha.
Yeah.
We don't want to rush anything, right?
Mhm.
So that last trailer we did in May, like even if you look back at May last year, 2018, where we are now, just over a year in the future, it's leap and bounds different. It's such
Absolutely.
a quality wise and everything's so much better, right? So we kind of wanted to do a trailer where we compare the old trailer to the new one and also show new stuff off in the new trailer, like where we currently are, just to kind of give an idea of what this time that we're using is being used for, right? Like it's going into making the game that we want, right?
Yeah, I think it's great to see how far you guys have come as well, because I have watched that old trailer and then watched some of the dev vlog footage, for example, and you can just tell on first glance, like it's improved so much.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things. Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, even if you go back through the dev vlogs, like I did this before devlog 8. I went and watched them all over again. I went from the first devlog where Johnny has a terrible mic and everything like that. And then even with the devlogs themselves, you see the devlog itself that Johnny has made, like the quality of it improve over time as we get more comfortable and more experience and more just learn more with our tools and stuff. The more comfortable we get, the better everything becomes, right? And that's kind of one of those things where if you rush it, you don't get that chance to kind of mature with what you're working with, right?
Absolutely.
It just doesn't grow. But if you have enough time for it, then you get comfortable and you get familiar with what you're doing, and the quality just improves. Like we improve as artists and programmers and developers over time, and it just gets better and better.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that you guys are doing as a team is that you're trying not to burn your developers out, right? You're very focused on allowing the team room to breathe, letting them work on a project that they enjoy, rather than perhaps like going into a crunch time and just burning themselves out completely, which is fair to say happens with quite a few games, and it can result in some negative things with the final results.
I don't think a lot of people understand the amount of pressure that is on like game developers in general, but like the amount of pressure that's on us. We, like me, the team was essentially for a very long time, it was me, Johnny, and Nomad, right? Making everything. And the amount of pressure that's on 3 people, we have the ability to make what we need and hire the people we need for contractors and whatnot. Like that's like Haxorus, he came in and he did all the animations for us, and he's still doing first person animations. And just the amount of pressure that's on us, and like for us to not burn out, it's incredibly difficult because we also all work from home, right? We work from I'm working from my living room, right? It's not like a normal job where you wake up, go to work from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It's like you have to set your own schedule, right? Which some people will be like, oh, that's not that difficult, but self-discipline every day is very difficult. And so what happened was when we kind of first started, when we had the first delay, right? We didn't crunch, but we definitely started working harder. And then around the May trailer last year, we definitely did crunch, and it was like we worked every single day. Like as soon as we woke up to like 5 a.m. or something like that, right? Every day. We didn't take weekends off or anything like that. And that we got a lot done, but then we kind of got burnt out from that, right? Like it's not, you can't sustain a work life like that. And you don't have like a personal life if you work like that, right? So it doesn't help your mental health and your physical health sitting down on a computer all day, right? So lately I've been trying to take weekends slowly. Like I used to also work 7 days a week from when I wake up to when I go to bed. And that's super difficult because even productivity wise, you know, you could be sitting at your computer 16 hours a day kind of thing, working 16 hours a day, but you might only get a quarter of that of like productive hours in, right? So you have to kind of work smarter rather than just harder. So I've been trying to take weekends off. You know, I go to the gym every morning, Monday to Friday kind of thing, and then come back and eat food and then start working. And I try to get an 8-hour day in every day. But we weren't always like that, right? We kind of always just hammered through stuff, and the burnout and the overworking and the crunch, it's not admirable. Some people kind of think it is, but it's definitely not.
No, I can definitely understand where you're coming from. I mean, so I work from home myself in a full-time job outside of what I do with Twitch and YouTube as well. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from, because working from home, a lot of people, I think, see that as a chance to say, well, that's easy. Like, you know, that's
yeah.
You're very lucky, and I'm sure you feel the same as me when I say, yes, I do feel very lucky, but it comes with its own challenges, right? Where, like you say, setting your own schedule, making sure you stick to it, that discipline every day.
Definitely.
And
it's very
as
easy
humans,
to be distracted.
Exactly. As humans, you're just not. Naturally, if you're not in an office with that work environment, and you haven't got colleagues beside you all the time, and inevitably a boss looking over your shoulder, you know, it's a very different environment, isn't it? That's just how it is.
Exactly. Like I always say, the environment for whatever I'm doing is super important, right? So whether it's I go to the gym because the gym is a workout environment, I exercise there, right? So it's very easy to stay on track and keep like the mindset that you need in order to do your task. But when you're at home and your home is where you live, but it's also where you work, it blends together. It's very hard to, you know, separate your home life from your work life. And a lot of the time you can't. And so even if I'm not at my computer working and I'm at home, it's like I can't relax because I'll be on Discord or something. I'll be talking, you know, still talking about Dead Matter, still technically working through Discord without directly working on the game, right? Whether it's community stuff, and you never really get away from that, even on my phone. And so you can't relax at home, and it's just one of those things that, you know, it kind of it's not as easy as it looks.
No.
Right? A lot of people love to be like, oh, you know, I can wake up and go to bed whenever I want, you know, I don't have to start at a certain time. But it doesn't matter if you don't have to start at a certain time, you still have to get that work done.
Yeah.
If you start at 4 p.m. like, and you still have 16 hours worth of work in a day to get done, well, you're not going to bed until you know, past midnight or something.
Yeah.
Right? So
absolutely. I fully understand where you're coming from. So with a little bit of understanding around how the development team are working on the game, a little bit of insight into where you've come from to get to where you are now, I'd like to kind of move on to questions about Dead Matter, specifically relating to your role. So I understand that you've had quite a lot to do with the world that we'll be playing in, as we've talked about. Can you tell us about how the team decided on Alberta as their setting?
This is kind of a lackluster answer, but Johnny was the one who decided on the location, and I'm like 99% sure he chose Alberta because he lives in Alberta. He lives in Calgary, and it was just one of those locations that, you know, people never did, right? Calgary is a big city, and it was perfectly viable for a zombie survival game. And I'm pretty sure that's why Alberta was chosen. No other reason besides Johnny lived there.
I mean,
I'm not 100% like sure about that, so if you do want to verify that with him, you can.
Johnny, if you're watching, we're sorry if that's wrong. But it's interesting you say that though, because surely that would give Johnny a bit more, I suppose, local research, right? Like his everyday life around him is potentially going to give him fuel towards what he needs to work on, and you as the team as well, with regards to designing the map especially, right?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that like I would love is like if I had lived in Alberta, in around Calgary, it would have made my job like 100 times easier.
Sure.
I've never been to Alberta. I've never even been that far out west. Like I live in Ontario and Ottawa, right? So I think it's like 3,000 kilometers away, right? So it's a very far distance, and I've never been there, but I've been there plenty of times on Google Maps. But it's hard to kind of get the same feeling for like a location just through Google Maps.
Absolutely.
Or a picture than if you actually live there.
So it kind of leads into one of my later questions I was going to ask you, but I'll move on to that one now, because you mentioned, looking on Google Maps and not living there yourself. Do you mind me asking what kind of research has actually gone into the map and the terrain, especially on your end of things?
So it's funny, the terrain originally back at the beginning of this year, we had to kind of scrap the old map because the way it was made with the terrain itself is we actually used like height maps that were taken from, I believe, NASA satellite images of around Calgary. So it was accurate to real life, like topology wise and whatnot. But the issue was Calgary, the city itself is larger than 20 by 20 kilometers, right? And that's our map size. So what we ended up doing with our map was we had a huge section cut out of Alberta. So it had the Rocky Mountains, the prairies, and then Calgary, I think. And that whole section was, I don't know, let's say 400 kilometers by 400 kilometers. So that's a huge area. Then we had to shrink that down into a 20 by 20 kilometer map. And it was literally just like straight up shrinking it down. But what happens when you shrink it down like that is all the landmarks and the proportions of everything change drastically, right? So you no longer have mountain ranges that are the correct width, but you have the correct height. So then you get these very spiky looking mountains and stuff. So then you have to then reduce the height of the mountains, but then the mountains aren't mountains anymore, they're hills. And we just ran into a ton of issues where the landscape didn't look natural. And we ran into other issues where we didn't quite have the understanding of how it was made, because the terrain before was made by a previous dev. And it was just lacking some stuff that we needed, right? So I kind of just decided, okay, I'm going to look at Google Earth. I'm going to make a new landscape, and I'm not going to try to make the same landscape that's in Alberta. Like, I'm not going to try to make mountains and stuff that are exactly the same as mountains that are there in real life. I'm just going to take kind of like a caricature of what Alberta is and then just make that. So I ended up spending, I don't know, a month or something like that making the new landscape, and it resembles Alberta in kind of theme, but not actual layout. So you have mountains to the west and prairies to the east, and that's kind of where the similarities end. Because if we tried sticking with actually how it's set up in real life, we just don't have this. We don't have the space, right? 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers, you'd get like a valley of a mountain, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And that's not an interesting environment. So everything has to be specifically made for a 20 by 20 kilometer play area, and then also made for gameplay, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I didn't quite understand that you guys had tried that to start with and then had to redo the whole thing. Which
we had a lot of work done on the map, but it sucks because if you don't have the perfect foresight for some of these things that you run into, like, you might end up just having to scrap the whole thing, right? And nobody has perfect foresight, so it's sometimes you have to stick with it and then just kind of work with what you have. And that's what we were trying to do. But then we just kind of ran into some issues, and we're like, it's better if we just scrap this all now, cut our losses, and start again. Because now we can hand make it the way that I wanted to and have it exactly how I wanted to, rather than try to have to manipulate stuff and, kind of make with what we have and suffer a bit, I guess.
Yeah.
I could just completely do everything how I wanted to. and I had all the control I needed to, and it ended up working out fantastic. The map now is a million times better than it was before, and I think people would definitely appreciate seeing the difference between the old map and the new map, especially with like the size of the mountains and stuff like that.
Definitely, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that, you know, I'm incredibly excited to jump in and explore, and it's going to be a huge environment anyway. Like, we're going to have a huge map to play with.
Yeah.
So
my only, if I can give kind of a notice right now, is currently I am the only environmental artist working on the world itself. Like the map, sorry. So I'm the only environmental artist working on the whole map. Oh, shit.
You're okay, don't worry about it. Take your time.
And it's a lot of work for one person, right? Like it's actually an impossible amount of work for one person to do in like a humane amount of time, right? So how we're releasing the map is we'll have a small closed alpha map, which is small, right? To test out a lot of the features that we have present in the game, and then there'll be an early access map, which will be slightly bigger, and then over time we'll increase the map to, it might never expand to the full 20 by 20. It will expand to where gameplay requires it, right? We don't want to just have empty space for the sake of having empty space, because in lots of games, like DayZ is a good example, there's a bunch of space that's just, there's nothing in it, and it, you know, if you have to walk through that, it's kind of boring. So we want to have a pretty good density of points of interest and stuff in our world. So if we have to sacrifice empty space to have a more interesting world, we'll do that, right?
Absolutely.
But it will take a long time until we get more environmental artists on the team that can help me with the entirety of the world. Then it's going to take a little bit of time to get a lot of those features and locations and stuff implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I assume I speak for everyone when I say, like, you know, they'd be willing to wait so long as obviously the finished product comes and everybody enjoys it. So it's nice to know that you're thinking about how the game will play and not just how the game will look. Because I think, like you say about with DayZ, there's a lot of dead space, and it's just not entertaining to walk through. Or, you know, we've all heard the term running simulator, right? It's, you know, it's true in some aspects, and hopefully that'll bring more, you know, kind of interactions with players if we're spending more time in these points of interest as well. So there's a lot of knock-on effects that I think would be really interesting.
It happens in a lot of survival games that have large maps. Like I know there's been some criticism of, like, well, our map is massive, like it's a lot bigger than other maps, right? And some people, they have the concerns that the map will just be empty, because it happens in a lot of survival games, right? But our goal is that we want to have it dense enough and realistic enough. We're not just going to plop stuff in the middle of nowhere that doesn't make sense. Like, everything will have a purpose for its location, right? Like, based off of real world data, essentially, of where things are located. And that will help kind of mitigate that walking simulator, because there will always kind of be something within walking distance that's interesting to go to, hopefully, whether it's, you know, a building above ground or something below ground. There should always be something interesting in an area that the player won't just be walking through a forest for 45 minutes with absolutely nothing for them to see.
It's interesting that you say you want to avoid. Sorry, do go on.
I was just saying that, we want to avoid nothing.
Yes, absolutely.
We want to have it
It's interesting that you mentioned specifically below ground as well, and that'll be something interesting to look into, which I think perhaps a lot of zombie survivals don't think about, is that below ground aspect. Like, you know, just because you have a map doesn't mean you can't expand past what you would think of initially, right? Which is that ground level, going upwards in buildings. Like, why not go down as well? You know, give you something to look at, give you something to do, something to explore.
We want to avoid I guess just surface level details. This is how I always kind of described the issue with a lot of survival games is they're very superficial. The map is essentially, it's just the terrain, right? It's just literally on one like horizontal plane. And we kind of want to avoid that. We want to have a lot of verticality to the game, whether it's tall building or the mountains, right? You'll have a lot of vertical range there, but then we want to have also the depth of the game, like literal depth in the ground with bunkers and laboratories and caves and sewers and stuff like that, because it's essentially a whole another level of the game. Technically, it is another level of the game that you can add, and it's a lot nicer because once you start putting stuff under the ground, it actually gives us that linear level design that I was talking before, where we don't really have a lot of that. But it gives us the opportunity to have a lot of linear levels and stuff, and so we can kind of control how stuff happen in underground areas and stuff. And it just opens up this huge opportunity for us to have a lot of interesting things underground that wouldn't make sense to have above ground. Like you wouldn't in Alberta and like rural Alberta, you wouldn't have like a huge laboratory complex above ground. But who knows? There might be one underground that's like a military industrial complex or something like
That's very
and
interesting.
we can fudge in, like we can fake a lot of this stuff, because in the real world technically we don't know what's under the ground in a lot of these places. Like there could be,
Yeah, there's
some kind of
there's a very slim chance of it. So with creative license, we can look at that in this kind of scenario especially, and kind of bring in that get your mind working, if you like, that kind of inner conspiracy theorist,
yeah, so we want to play very big big role with stuff like that, with just the government in general and other kinds of I guess institutions or whatnot, and have a really deep world that's not just what you see literally on the surface. Like there is more to the eye than what you see.
Interesting.
There's more to the world than what your eye can see, and the underground areas, like I'm gonna love when I actually start adding a lot of that stuff in, right? Because Johnny worked on procedural bunkers, right?
Yeah.
So the whole procedural bunker system, when he made it, he was just using some of my old assets. So I never made anything specifically for that system. But once I have time to do that, stuff like sewers, bunkers, train tunnels and stuff underground, caves, like all that stuff can be procedural with a lot of handcrafted elements thrown in. We have such a large actual physical area that we can put stuff in. Like it's kind of limitless, right? With the possibilities of what we can have underground for these huge complexes, I guess.
Yeah,
and I'm super excited for that.
I've got like this image in my head of, like walking through an abandoned a train tunnel or something like that with your group. You've all got the flashlights on, and there's like actual detail in what's around you, as you're walking down the tracks, and you can. And I love the idea behind that, like having like that. I think really with anything to do with zombies, horror, anything like that, like there are a lot of possibilities with those dark, dingy places, and in a zombie survival game like Dead Matter even more so. So it's interesting that you guys are thinking about that. I think that's really exciting.
I'm a huge fan of Half-Life Stalker series, Metro, and so a lot of, like, once I start working on that stuff, you'll probably see a lot of inspiration for that, right? So like metro tunnels under the ground, or subway tunnels, I guess, but not subway tunnels for like civilians and stuff like that. Like one bunker that might be, say, 2 kilometers away could be connected by underground train tunnel to another bunker.
Interesting.
So
okay,
big stuff like, I'm talking about like massive structures like that underground is kind of what I want to push towards in the future when I have more time for that.
Yeah.
Because it's always been in Miscreated. I didn't even know they had bunkers for the longest time. And then when I kind of found one when I was playing with Johnny one day, I'm like, why don't they do more stuff like this? This is an awesome little thing to stumble upon, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an untapped potential.
I think the thing with landmarks, right, and points of interest is if they're not common enough, we're going to feel like we're missing out for a long time. But if you have a lot of landmarks to stumble across, and you're always finding something new and exciting and something to explore, that's different, because you're going to stick with it longer, and then you're more likely to bump into another, and it just it drives that ambition for you to go and explore the rest of the world. So
yeah, exploration in Dead Matter is, for me, it's something really important, because that's what I enjoy doing in a lot of games, is just purely exploring the world and seeing what there is, and just stumbling upon new things every once in a while. Like with the procedural bunkers and whatnot, that will pretty much always be different every time you go into it on a server, right? Like different servers will have different instances of a bunker, but if you keep going into the same bunker in the same server, it will always be the same.
Yeah.
But even having bunkers and other things randomly spawn, like maybe one server instance will have, you know, a bunker here, but the next server instance won't. So it's like you'll never know if every time you play, if this area might have something. You might have to play 10, 15 different servers to finally stumble upon an instance where this specific location actually does have an entry. But you might never know that. So it keeps you always exploring. There's always the potential for a new area to kind of open up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just to kind of clarify on that, for anybody that's watching this video, there's going to be a whole variety of places that will be randomly placed around the map, right? So we're looking at Nera quarantine zones, for example. They can prop up in a variety of locations, and that changes on every single server you play, correct?
Yeah, so the way those work is they're all predefined locations, because that's it's very difficult to do something like that completely procedural. So we hand make those locations, but we have basically two variations of it. We have the variation that has so like the Nera camp, and then we have the variation that has just nothing there. And then if we have, say, in one section of the world, we might have 10 Nera camp locations plotted out, but only one will ever spawn. And so if you play on 10 different servers and it happens that every one is different, you'll have a different camp in a different one of those 10 different spots.
Awesome.
Right? So it really varies up everything. Like you might play one time and a bridge might be completely blocked off. You can play another time and that bridge won't be blocked.
That's awesome.
And just a lot of variation in the world itself like that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure I've seen that on any other games in the genre. So
yeah, the only other game I can think of that really does that off the top of my head is Left 4 Dead 2, which is funny. But Left 4 Dead 2, the way they do it is they just have a wall pop up, so you have to take a different path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely new for this genre, and I think things like this could help drive the game forward to success. So it's very exciting to hear about.